Welcome, children of Iluvatar, to this episode of Echoes of Tolkien. I'm Ryan.
I'm Derek.
I'm Colton.
And I'm Logan.
In this week's episode, I think we're going to focus more on fan theories or hypothetical situations. They can be fun. So let's start out. What would have happened if Boromir was successful in taking the ring from Frodo?
Well, Middle-earth would go to shit. No.
I mean,
no, I
in
think
a nutshell, yes.
Yeah, Boromir's temptation of the ring, I think, started off so strong to begin with that I think he would have been taken so quickly by the power of it, and he would have, tried to do good in parentheses, but I think he would have been so greedy with power that he would try to just rule Middle-earth, and he would essentially take on that Sauron rule of almost destroying Middle-earth himself.
I mean, it is a gift.
Was it temptation, or was it out of a true, genuine, wanting the good for his own people?
I think the heart of Boromir is something to discuss. Like, he was a good person.
I think where he goes to physically try and take it from Frodo was more of the temptation and the pull, but his plan was he wanted to direct the ring to Minas Tirith.
I get that's what he wanted because he's like, oh, this will help our people. I just don't think he would have been able to wield it to the point where it would have been good. I think, just like, obviously, all of man.
No, I mean,
nobody
can.
For
sure he wouldn't have.
But I think he already was feeling the temptation of it too strongly where it ended up being like, I need more. So, it helps us here. I can take out Sauron and Mordor, but now I need to rule.
What is concerning, too, is, especially in the books, Denethor has a planet here. He's already, been in contact with Sauron.
He's already lost his marbles.
Isn't that wild?
So, if Boromir brings the ring back, home to Gondor, and, they're already, in connection with Sauron, I think that it goes much quicker.
I'd be taking the ring literally, directly to the doorstep of Mordor.
I mean, I was thinking more with the question, if he would have taken the ring to Gondor, if he was successful, it ultimately would have just been the downfall of men.
Yeah.
Because he would have cut off any alliance with Rohan, any of the free peoples.
Yeah.
It just would have, that would have just,
I think it would have been, we don't need them.
Accelerated the doom and gloom of Middle Earth.
Yeah.
The free peoples.
Yeah. I mean, and by the time they found it, Gondor wanted the ring out of fear because they knew Sauron's forces were already coming against them. They were already fighting that fight. And, their whole plan is we can use this weapon against the enemy. And so, the intention was good, but the ring is all around evil. So, nobody can use the ring for good. But yeah, I mean, it would have been the downfall of man because this conception that you can actually utilize it for a good is just asinine. It just does not work.
Yeah, I think.
But in a world
of
of magic and power, it's understandable how someone with a good heart would think, "Oh, we have this powerful thing. We can now use this."
Right. As if it was just another magical item. That this is the ring that Sauron created, with his own being.
It is like the race of men, though. Even in this, you can relate to your everyday life where you're oh, I can do anything. I can do this. I can do this. It is the same translation where if I have this, I can make this happen.
If I have more money.
Yeah, more power, or anything, I can make all this happen. But eventually, you do get to the point where with Boromir, I'm like, I don't think anything would be enough.
I didn't even think about when I was posing the question. I didn't even think about Denethor already is in possession of one of the Palantiri.
Right.
Yeah.
So
it makes sense because they were originally Gondor's talking devices, anyways.
Yeah.
Which is why Aragorn's so quickly able to kind of take the one and actually overthrow Sauron in it when he goes to talk to him.
I do like seeing
Hornburg.
Yeah, I do like seeing more on the Palantiri. I say it wrong every time. Palantiri.
I mean, if you're watching the movies, you're hearing Palantir.
Yeah,
but it is Palantiri.
Yeah, so I was gonna say I do like seeing some more of that. Not jump back in Rings of Power, but I do like seeing more storyline behind that.
Right.
A little bit touched on Lord of the Rings, but I feel like they're really making that more focal point here, coming up on Rings of Power, and that direct line essentially with communication with Sauron. That's pretty cool.
Okay. I got another hypothetical, I guess. What if Saruman never would have turned evil, for lack of a better word?
Saruman?
I think it would
have joined up. I wonder what so much would have changed because Saruman obviously at the time was the most powerful wizard in Middle Earth, and at that point, I'm like, what would Gandalf's role have been? Because would you have needed Gandalf if
Same
Saruman
thing.
would have?
I mean, all 5 wizards that were sent to Middle Earth were tasked with the same
yeah.
mission, so they would have worked together. I would have thought. My first thought is that if Saruman never turned bad, we'll just say, he never would have poisoned Theoden's mind, which would never have weakened Rohan.
Right.
You know, Rohan would have been better set up for a coming war.
That also, when you think of Sauron's armies, at least movie-wise, Saruman was an integral part in creating his armies. So if he wasn't evil, Sauron's armies would be greatly reduced.
Well, I'm not 100% sure about that, because I mean, what wasn't wasn't Saruman's Uruk-hai like really just like was the only thing was against Rohan. After that, like, you know, if we're looking at the movie-wise timeline, we're not really seeing Saruman's army except for its attack on Rohan. Everything past that is all Mordor's forces.
Yeah, but you realize how much he weakened Rohan.
Oh, yeah,
And
so
then Rohan-
absolutely.
And Rohan, when they came in, they were the ones that saved Gondor in Pelennor Fields.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I feel like as far as Sauron's strength, it wouldn't have made much of a difference, but it did contribute, obviously, it did to weaken the world of man, is to weaken Rohan, to diminish their forces right before the big battle there towards the end.
Yeah, I mean, Saruman's armies were not ready for all of this to happen.
No, absolutely not.
They weren't strengthened yet. They weren't ready for the War of the Ring. So if Saruman never would have turned bad, that would have strengthened the side of good. Now, I don't know how quick Rohan would have been to ride to any aid.
Right.
However,
because I mean, where was Gondor?
Where was Gondor?
Well, I mean, so really, you can take that as far back as whenever Saruman took Isengard, like, because the whole thing is he was there essentially like working for Gondor as like the key holder for Isengard, and eventually kind of just like took it over, and then
he was there for Rohan and Gondor.
Yeah,
because of
but
its location.
Oh, it's
But I'm saying
actually
there's
Rohirrim and
parts of-
King that allowed Saruman though to occupy it. So, Saruman asked, and they allowed him because they thought it was going to be a great benefit to have Saruman live there right at their doorstep, essentially.
That was their mistake.
They saw the benefit in it.
But what I'm saying is like, so he played as a counselor for both Rohan and Gondor there in Isengard. Well, you could take back all the times of, how many times was his counsel poisonous?
That's
to to weaken Rohan, like we're talking thousands of years.
Because do we even know when Saruman actually turned?
We don't know for sure, but we know with the Council of Elrond, Galadriel himself, and Gandalf, they wanted to cast out this necromancer out of Dol Guldur, and he didn't want to do that. I think he also kind of lied to them, saying that the ring was already lost to the seas forever, that it had flown down the river.
Because he wanted to find it himself.
Right. So, we know to those points he was already bad.
Which is at least, 50 to 60 years before The Lord of the Rings.
Right. But, we touched upon this earlier in the podcast, where he was always kind of jealous of Gandalf to begin with. So, is that when he was...
I mean, it's very possible he's always had darkness in his heart. He could have been turned before they even were sent to Middle Earth, or at least the initial darkness in him could have always been there, and so it was just so easy for him to turn whenever the opportunity struck.
Yeah.
That he could potentially gain the power that Sauron created.
Just thousands of years of subtly poisoning the minds of men,
Right.
And then opportunity shows up and. Army of 10,000 strong at least.
Yeah, because it is fascinating though, because when you're looking at Saruman, and he does try to get Gandalf though, to help him wield the power. Now he says redirect it. So, was Saruman intention was to take out Sauron at the end? Was it to try and just take over Middle Earth and he rule it, Like, what was his full out intention there? Because
Saruman's full intention was to become the most powerful.
yeah, so it's one of those things where you're like, okay, his end goal was probably to destroy Sauron, but not the ring, and then wield it himself, which I think that would be a fascinating storyline right there, of what Middle Earth would look like under a Saruman rule.
With the ring being like, again, for lack of a better term, like a Horcrux of Sauron. If Sauron is defeated by Saruman's armies at the end, and Saruman is left with the ring, like, who is in true control?
I mean, I think to some degree, like, Sauron would always remain in control of the ring because as we've discussed, like, the ring is Sauron.
Right,
like,
as long as the ring lives, Sauron can return.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, but, like, because so much of it is poured into him, like, I mean, we look at Sauron and the ring as, like, two separate entities, but, like, they really are the same. And so, like, I kind of look at it the same as we were talking last week about Morgoth is essentially, after his physical defeat, he remains tied to the world, kind of like Sin. It's like, I feel like as long as the ring is around and it is, you know, possessed by somebody, you know, Sauron is that sin that, you know, people may be wearing around on their finger. Like, Sauron would be in control because Sauron is that sin that they're carrying with them.
It's something to ponder.
Yeah. Now, one thing, so we're talking about Boromir a little bit earlier, and talking about, like, conflicts of power. Had to be kind of weird when you have Aragorn and Boromir at that point starting to engage with each other, because you have Aragorn, who knows he's going to be taking the throne of Gondor back from essentially someone who has actually been in Gondor, taking care of Gondor, fighting for Gondor his whole life, and then Aragorn, who essentially is going to be traipsing in there and taking that power
coming out
away.
from the wild.
Yeah, coming out from wild and taking that power away. I imagine that had to be an interesting power struggle where Aragorn, to some sense, had to be like, feel kind of like uncomfortable with the situation of like, this person's actually like grown up in my city.
His father's the steward.
And like, he has to.
I'm only asking this, Colton, because you just reread The Fellowship like just a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember exactly. Does it give any more insight to like Boromir's initial feelings to Aragorn?
I don't quite recall. He's not as like resistant to Aragorn being like the claim. Now it also talks about, you know, when he's a kid, you know, Denethor does tell him that he is ruling in like the interim of there not being a king. Granted, it's been, you know, hundreds of years,
thousands of years
you know,
at this point.
Even at that point, under like the stewards, like they're still kind of under the mind frame of a king will come back eventually.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't think in
Man,
the books
that is kind of crazy. Thousands of years, and they're still like, a king will come eventually.
I wonder if well, that's where I'm like, if I was born, I'd be like, why now?
Yeah.
Like, why all of a sudden now? I'm like, thousands of years now at once too. I'm not sure if he'd feel honored or be like, kind of feel gypped.
like in the books, there is no line of like, Gondor has no king, Gondor needs no king. That's not a line in the book. That's, I think, an adaptation from Peter Jackson.
Line,
yeah,
it's a good line.
Yeah.
And that's where the dynamics are definitely different between the book and the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you like them better or not, I don't know. But the movie does make an interesting dynamic where you have this guy who's reluctant to embrace his true heir because, you know,
and I think we discussed that the other week, is like it does make for kind of a more compelling story to have, you know, someone who is, you know, fate, you know, has decided he's gonna rule either way, and he's not so sure he's up to the task, you know, because he has Isildur's blood running through his veins, and, you know, he's viewed in the movies, you know, as Isildur was a flawed person who betrayed the world of man, but like, you know, obviously that's not completely, you know, blanketed. It's a lot of complications, and we also discussed before that, like, even as Isildur died, like, he was on his way back to Rivendell because he's like, oh, this ring is bad. He's like, I need to figure out what to do with this because I didn't destroy it before.
I think goes to show too. I think always getting counsel from the elves is always fascinating. How everyone knows like elves are the wisest, and usually good at providing direction, how everyone does seek out the elves for the advice on what to do.
I mean, they've also been around for a lot longer.
Just it has to be like just a nice thing knowing you're the wisest of races. That
I mean, and it makes sense too. I mean, men in Tolkien's world still only live, 80 to 100 years. Like, they live normal lifespans unless you're descended from Numenor. So it makes sense that you'd seek counsel from elves because, many of them have already been in Middle-earth for thousands of years. And they would be wiser because they've been through hell.
And it's fascinating, though, when you think about how the elves are left Middle-earth, Third Age, at least the majority of them. You're losing that counsel or that deep counsel or that go-to place in Middle-earth then after that.
Yeah, I mean, and that goes into something we talked about last week is that, like, towards the end of the Third Age there, like, it is like and they say it in the movies and it's in the books to a degree. It's just like the elves leaving is destined because the world of, like, Middle-earth is to become the world of men, and so they are to take their own lead at that point. It's something, destined is that, men will inherit the earth in some degree, like Middle-earth. And, it is interesting. It's almost like I don't want to compare, the elves to gods, but it is kind of like a disconnection from gods, in a way where towards the end of the Third Age there, that men are on their own.
Like, Tolkien did kind of write this whole thing as to be like the mythology of, like, the UK.
Right.
Because, they're kind of across the pond from them. They have all, the Greek mythology and the Vikings and all of that stuff where the UK doesn't really have anything like that. So, like, he kind of wrote this to be, like, like everybody else leaves and it is men, and then it slowly transforms into today.
I am still hoping that after the next Armageddon in the world, all that's left is, like, some humans and then Lord of the Rings books, so that they take that and then in the future they think that J.R.R. Tolkien's writings was the creation of the
world history.
Yeah,
There's enough there.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think Tolkien, and that's why his such in-depth writing has created such, like I said, fan theories, things like that, because there's so much content to work off of, and it is like a true history book. Like,
it
if
really
you didn't
is.
know anything there and you read them, you'd be like, oh,
This is
real
pretty
history. This
fascinating.
happened. I'm like, wow, why can't we do magic anymore?
It's almost more interesting than our own.
Yeah. And it is curious, too, after, Sauron's destroyed and Mordor, becomes more free land, is how that landscape changes. I know it sounds like stupid when you say landscape. I'm like, do they start getting crops and do they start getting all this stuff? Are we actually expanding the ability for people to live, survive, and things like that? And
just because the evil is eliminated from a physical place in the world.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
Is who's going to start inheriting that? Is it going to be the men of Gondor? Then you're going to start getting these whole other civilizations then in that whole part of Middle Earth.
Well, I mean, so Aragorn does still, and Gondor, and I know Rohan and Naum are kind of coming to him, but, like, he continues to kind of fight, like, the evil that's out that way. I mean, it's not like it's like Sauron's defeated and it's like, oh, there's trees and crops and whoever wants to inhabit that land can. Like, they still have, the men who, like, were servants and, like, his slaves and, like.
And there's still orcs in the world. Like, not all evil is eliminated.
So, like,
it's just the powers.
There were orcs all over.
Yeah, and it's just more so,
though,
like, support and power has been diminished at that point.
I wonder if the orcs, though, at that point, because obviously, like, they're a race of their own, if the orcs start becoming a part of the civilization. They've always been, I know, a little bit of chaos in Middle-earth, but I feel like, obviously, under the rule of Sauron, it got drastically worse, where it's like the intention was evil. I'm curious if there ends up being, just say, treaties or working together civilly then.
Well,
see, I think they just hate men.
So that's where I'm kind of, like, torn, because I don't have a lot of, I don't have a whole lot of knowledge on orc. But, like, I can see where they're going with, say, the Rings of Power, especially Season 2 there. They were trying to humanize them a little bit, but, like, if I'm not mistaken, like, they are bred to be, like, evil
I mean,
creatures.
even though they can talk and have somewhat kind of like a belief systems and such, they're still kind of just like beasts.
Yeah.
Very much at the end of the day.
Like,
I
they are
don't know that they really have
animals.
the ability to truly
treat with
Like-
anyone, and just
I mean,
I feel like they'd
they
always
still fight
just
within
kinda,
themselves a bunch.
right, exactly. I think at that point they'd kind of just be a nuisance. They'd be a pest throughout Middle Earth that they'd have to eliminate at that point, because I like I said, don't have whole knowledge on orcs, but I'm pretty sure like they were bred to just murder, kill, and like everything else, no matter what the Rings of Power is trying to make them out to be, with families and children and everything else. In the
Yeah, the Rings of Power thing got some flack.
yeah, they
online.
did.
This orc goes home every night, man. Like, I don't know how I'm supposed to provide for this family. This economy is crap.
So you're saying Sauron is basically Scrooge?
There you go.
Another hypothetical. If Tolkien was still alive today, or when the movies came out, what do we think he would have thought of the films? Both the Hobbit films and the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
I don't think he would have liked them.
He probably wouldn't have.
I think he would have thought they deviated from his books too much, and he probably would have thought that it didn't do a justice to his storyline. I think he'll appreciate Lord of the Rings more, but I think he'd appreciate the aesthetics of it and say, this is what I envisioned for it to look like, but I think he'd have some problems with the storyline.
I think, not to pick on the Hobbit, I do not think he would like the Hobbit at all.
No.
The one, stretching it to 3 films when it's like the shortest book. The Hobbit very much glorifies the killing, makes the over-the-top battle scenes and gore.
Whereas his book is more wholesome.
I'll
Yeah,
be
I mean, we
honest.
talked about this before again. The Hobbit was very much against, like, war is stupid. So, like,
Instead, let's glorify it.
yeah, it's a, I do not think he would like the way the Hobbit was portrayed in the Hobbit trilogy at all.
I might actually say, I think The Hobbit sticks to the books better than Lord of the Rings sticks to the books, to a point. Because I think there's a little bit more cheer and stuff in The Hobbit than there is.
I think you have a good solid point. Like, they definitely have additions, but I do think their additions in The Hobbit are a little more subtle than the changes in The Lord of the Rings. Whereas we've already discussed, like, the changes in The Lord of the Rings work for the medium that they're trying to produce.
Yeah.
But, like, I do think the changes in The Hobbit and the additional characters, additional jokes, whatever, like, they are kind of more subtle.
Because in The Hobbit, you have the scene, like, with Bilbo and Gollum, which is pretty much verbatim of the book.
They did a really good job with that scene, yeah.
And then
Yeah, it was
I
one of
think
the
even
better
with Bilbo's
scenes.
interaction then with Smaug, or Smaug, however you want to say it, I think that's also pretty well direct indication.
I mean,
of,
as we've
like,
said
the big
before,
scenes. Yeah,
those scenes with Bilbo in those movies are the best
they
scenes.
are. Yeah, they are. I
like
mean,
the only good scenes.
yeah.
I would actually kind of disagree, though. The Hobbit is so just different from what the book was.
I mean, in sense of
And yes,
tone, I think so.
Yeah.
But, like, just like the way I look at it, the additional scenes in The Hobbit could have that divert from the book. I mean, even something as so much as, like, when they're jumping on the little mining carts and bury Smaug and gold and stuff like that. Like, those scenes could be cut entirely, and the movie would flow more like the book just fine.
Oh, yeah. That scene looks so bad.
It is. It's terrible. And the additional characters, everything. Cut all that stuff out, and, like, the movies do kind of go into the books pretty well. It's the additional stuff that really throws it off. The Lord of the Rings changes some character things that, like, throw off the whole book entirely. So I will say, and to Ryan's point, if you were to cut out the additional stuff in The Hobbit, it does flow pretty much like the book. The Lord of the Rings diverts a bit.
Yeah, not to, like, jump
The
back
Lord of the
on.
Rings does divert a bit, but I do think, like, the stuff they change, like, everything still does, though, try to keep Tolkien's message.
Oh, 100%.
I just think that trilogy does a better job of keeping to Tolkien's message, tone, the important stuff that Tolkien would want to show.
I'm saying, like, the end goal of Lord of the Rings probably meets Tolkien's idea better than Hobbit's end goal of them walking away from the movie. Because in reality, Peter Jackson's versions of Lord of the Rings, like I say, I'd say the end goal, you might be right. I feel like the Hobbit, though, is more similar to the books. But yeah, so Tolkien, though, I think overall, I don't want to say he'd be disappointed, but I think if he was alive, he would have his hands in that so much, we would have gotten completely
It's just so
different.
ironic that the
completely different
producing
stuff.
studio wanted to stretch it into 3 films to just make profits.
Yep.
I know you're mad about
And that's
that,
just
but yeah.
so counter to what I think Tolkien would have wanted at all. And I think it all just gets lost and muddied. And
I still just think back to how bad we wanted those movies, and then they came out, and I'm like, eh.
so I think we all kind of discussed that. But like, what do we think Tolkien's interpretation of the Lord of the Rings trilogy would be?
Like interpretation, like in regards
Like,
to
would his react? Like, would he be a fan of the trilogy? Would he have liked it?
no, same thing. I think he would have liked the scenery of it and been like, that's how I envision Middle Earth. I think he probably would have had a problem with the changes of the story, because I think when you invest, especially like he did invest your whole life into these works that to you are probably perfect, and even seeing those changes, even if they seem subtle, I'm like, you're not seeing your story.
Right.
You're seeing an adaptation, which I think is harder for an author to be like, that's an adaptation, versus like us as a viewer who's like, oh, we like that. This is your baby. I mean, this is what you've been working on your whole life.
I agree. I don't think he would be a fan at all of the gore.
I was gonna say I think even with a good message, like there is a glorification of the battle scenes in those movies,
Yes.
which obviously we all love, but like Tolkien didn't like that. That wasn't like
Yes.
Tolkien understood the necessity of war, but like he didn't glorify it in any sort of way. And the movies do,
Yeah.
they throw a lot of stock into those scenes, and
sure.
like it makes for great content. Like it's great to watch those films; it's exciting, but like it does divert from.
And
like,
I love watching the war scenes.
Oh,
The
absolutely,
yeah,
100%.
Those are cool stuff.
And like not to say that Tolkien wouldn't also like maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, and enjoy those scenes. But as far as his message in his book, like that wasn't the point of them. But like in the movies when we're watching them, like, hey, get to the battle scene.
Yeah.
I think Tolkien might argue, well, if you took the Battle of Helm's Deep out, would the message of the Two Towers still be as strong?
Absolutely not.
No, I think as a viewer of film versus book is to get engaged in the movie and understand the actual consequences. Because unless you see the death and you see the war and what evil brings, and I think in movie adaptations you have to see those consequences, which was all that death and the loss.
So much death.
Yeah. No, so I think actually like you have to see that visibly to really get the whole message of the movie. Because if you're just going around in movies and you don't get to see that consequence and the hurt, the pain, things like that, you're not gonna feel at the end of the films the same message.
Yeah. I think the films do a good job of, like, with Helm's Deep. Yeah, in all three movies, you got kind of like the Battle of Amen, Battle of Helm's Deep, and Pelennor Fields, and then Battle of the Black Gates. Like, all of them have severe consequence.
Yeah.
Win or loss. Like, you feel that. You're invested in it.
Absolutely. But overall, I think I don't think he'd be pissed, but I think he'd be a little disappointed.
Yeah, I mean his son was. Like,
Yeah,
Christopher Tolkien did not like the direction of the movies at all.
And I kind of look at that as probably a direct reflection of what his
Yeah,
father
I would
was.
hope so. Like, I mean, he's his own son spent his entire life dedicated to his father's work. I'd imagine he knows his father pretty well. So, like, I will take Christopher Tolkien's like opinion about the movies and say, okay, yeah, maybe J.R.R. Tolkien would not love them because who's gonna know you better than the son that spent his life editing and tweaking,
I get
like,
all of that, and I get their feelings. However, I came to being a fan because of the films.
Oh,
as
obviously.
a kid.
And so is many. Almost every. That's a good part though about like the films getting out there is it created a bigger fan base, just like the shows we talked about before. It expands that fan base. So I do think it's inherent good, and I think overall the Tolkien estate is probably happy they were made because of that. Not saying because they make a lot more money, but let's face it, like it keeps keeps J.R.R. Tolkien's name alive. It keeps the money coming in as well.
I mean, in this podcast itself, like we're early on, but like the whole concept of this podcast is to delve deeper into all of Tolkien's work, and none of that would be if it wasn't for the movies.
I don't know if I'd say it wouldn't be. I think because the books and everything hold their own as it is.
But
So it
but
would
would any of you individually be as big of a fan if it
No.
wasn't for the movies?
Oh, not
Because
it
I was
definitely
never-
amplified it. It definitely amplified the draw and the reach to like get the fandom out there. But there's still a lot of people who are dedicated to like solely the literature.
Oh, absolutely.
And
I think it goes from different, like, it's almost like learning styles. Like, you have people who like reading books, people who like watching movies. I'm obviously, I mean, I like reading, but, like, I'm more of a visually aesthetic person, so I'm drawn to movies.
Right.
So I'd say, like, the movies are what essentially grabbed a hold of me that made me want to read the books, make me want to dive in the content. So I think that's probably how, I'll say majority of fans, and if they say that's not how majority of fans, like, I don't think it's true. I mean, majority of fans who are in Lord of the Rings probably started
Because
off
of the
with
movies.
Started off with the movies.
Yeah,
That
I mean,
Fellowship
at
VHS
at least
tape.
in our range, our age. range.
Our age. Oh yeah, our age.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
because
I
there was
was
plenty of
never
fans beforehand.
a
Yeah.
huge reader to begin with, but once I watched the movies, got the books, that's where it just took off for me.
Yeah.
And
I mean, even to this day, I really don't read a lot of other things outside of Lord of the Rings.
but you'll read Tolkien.
I'll read Tolkien, and that's kind of, I guess, my flaw. Like, I tried starting Game of Thrones, but I compare everything to Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, Millworth related, and I just always come back to Tolkien's works.
I feel like Tolkien's writings, there's something about it just feels authentic.
Yeah.
He feels authentic. Like, it wasn't just a, let me write these books and make money. And I'm not saying that's what the estate does. Now I'm saying, like, Tolkien, I feel like his intention of these books, even if no one read them, was, I want to create this for me because this is what I want to see.
I don't think you would have got as deep as he did
Yeah.
throughout the whole, even the ages that, like, are before the third age. And the whatever. I mean, it goes so deep, and you can't do that just by trying to sell a screenwrite to somebody.
No, it was true love. Like, that's
Yeah,
what it was.
for
He loved creating the mythology, and I
almost
think
like
that makes a huge
therapy.
difference.
I honestly think
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
therapy,
that too.
yeah.
Yeah, because you do tell a difference whenever you're like reading people who are writers to be writers. I'm like not to trash any of them. Like, even Game of Thrones. Like there's good content there, but like there is something different about reading anything that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote that that is just like purely from his heart. He loved every bit of it, and that's why there's changes. That's where there's letters, everything. Like, because like he wanted to perfect it. Like, that's really what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, he has early letters, so many things like he initially jotted down got changed,
right.
like the way things were interpreted or characters and such. Like, things changed, so like he was constantly tweaking to perfect this world.
Yeah, because
All
he
of that.
was trying, like, he was writing a history. That's what he was doing. We brought that up earlier. It's like he was trying to write a world history.
Yeah.
Like, he wanted to create something out of his mind that was world history, and he was trying to make that as perfect as he possibly could. And I like, great writers all around, but like J.R.R. Tolkien like had passion.
And
Like,
this is
real
maybe
passion.
where I'm naive because I have these Tolkien blinders on. But is there any authors even somewhere close?
J.K. Rowling. I think now it's become monetary at this point, but I think when they started writing Harry Potter, I would say, like, J.K. Rowling was well invested into it. Now, to the depth
I think she's well invested.
and the
but
type
I mean,
of
like,
Tolkien, like, the depth Tolkien went, I mean, you have, like, Rebecca Yarros now and people like that. Like, those are more modern authors who are creating these other worlds, Sarah J. Maas, things like that. They're all writers like that. But I think J.R.R. Tolkien is still, like, that baseline that everyone has fed from for so long. Because, again, I think that without J.R.R. Tolkien, you wouldn't have all those writers now taking that content. Because I really think he kind of created that first step for people to feed from, that it has expanded that fantasy writing.
yeah. Only because of pop culture. The only one I would maybe argue would be George R.R. Martin. But my argument would be he hasn't even finished his works. But I mean,
And maybe in time he will, and like he
goes into. Well, you better hurry up. He ain't getting any younger.
But even him
But
talking
he-
about his works doesn't feel as authentic to me. It
Yes,
almost seems like
I would
a
agree.
chore. But,
I
yeah.
think, and I don't know that he'd ever admit this, but I think the show really was detrimental to his success of writing and finishing the stories.
it probably became about money at that point.
But I mean,
could be wrong about
the
that.
amount of he's invested deeply into the story and the history and the religions and everything inside of those books, similar to Tolkien. But yeah, I would agree. He'd probably argue that we're wrong.
Yeah,
It's
no,
fine.
Absolutely. No, I've never met the guy, so I couldn't really tell you. It just seemed they're just something very authentic to Tolkien, and I think it comes from his writings, and it's almost like everything though he's done. Because I can't imagine how you would even sleep at night when you have all this in your head and all you want to do is like get it written down. I mean, imagine I don't want to say obsession, like I'm not saying it's a bad obsession, but the obsession you'd have with that, because if something comes to your mind, you just want to get it out, and how do you create this story out of it?
And the different layers that you have to have so well thought out to connect everything.
Yeah.
He must have had a dedicated wife too. Man, it's probably the only thing he gave a shit about.
And you know, I really do appreciate Tolkien's ability to write such a story that's so captivating, and it doesn't have to be like pornographic.
Right.
That
Like
was,
the Game of Thrones thing, I see again, picking on it again. But like, I don't need that stuff in
No.
my book to be able to be
Captivating.
stimulated by the writings.
And I actually think that's a great point, because I think actually that's where like fantasy books are going nowadays, is because, you know, they'll call romance books have time now, but I think that's a great point. Is Tolkien wrote something that didn't need all that extra fluff, the sex appeal, we'll call it literally, and now all the writings have to intertwine that to get readers' attentions, and I think that's a sad thing for I'll say the fantasy realm, because I think it's starting to like merge into, like you said, something like pornographic reading versus like the heart of the book. So you have two different, oh, I like this story, and you have people reading like, oh, I just want to get to these parts. It's very
Right.
interesting.
Well, and even looking at like, you know, the movie and show adaptations of it, you know, Lord of the Rings is able to reach out to like a younger audience.
Yeah.
Whereas those other books, I mean, that's mature reading. Those are mature shows. For Lord of the Rings, I mean, it was a PG-13 rating. So, I mean, you're able to kind of keep it more to entice a younger audience versus needing to wait until they're, you know.
Yeah, I might take heat on this. I don't know, but like my kids are 9 and 7, and I've just introduced them to Lord of the Rings within the last few months, and I don't feel bad about it because,
No, of course not.
to me, I mean, there's nothing morally wrong with them. They're not too gore. I mean, there's some gore. I get it, but
How are your boys liking the Lord of the Rings?
oh yeah, I mean,
Getting
they
real into
like
it?
Yeah, they're cool. But where was I gonna go with that? It's just such a good story of good and evil, and like what's at stake, and friendships and loyalty, and you know, standing up for things you believe in. That I can let them watch that and know that they're not just wasting their time, you know, or rotting their brains. Yeah.
No, I think that's a good point, is the wholesome nature of Tolkien's writing. Now, The Hobbit, to me, is like a much easier read.
Oh, 100%.
The Hobbit's
yeah.
is
The
a
Hobbit
good
is a-
read. Like,
I don't know
Hobbit
how
was
many
meant-
times. I don't know how many times I've read The Hobbit. It's very easy to read.
It was targeted for a younger audience.
is.
I
Yeah.
do believe.
Yeah, but The Hobbit is like the perfect book of just an easy read, a fun read,
An adventure.
adventure. It's not too long, doesn't drag out too much. I mean, it's very descriptive, but kind of what you'd expect. Lord of the Rings is a little bit harder.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know if any of you know, because I don't know. Did he start with The Hobbit and then it expanded from there? Or did he already have preliminary writings? Or
I think The Hobbit was his beginning. Like, I think that was his primary writing, and I think it wasn't until years later he decided he wanted to expand on.
Yeah, I don't even think actually he knew in The Hobbit that was the Ring of Power.
Yeah, I think in the Hobbit that
Yeah.
was literally just
Yeah.
know. a
But it's
writing.
interesting enough that he wrote this book. He had to have an idea. Because
Yeah.
to make this whole scene of him and Gollum in this ring, this powerful ring
Yeah.
that he found, he had to have some idea.
Maybe,
he might
maybe
not
not.
have known, you know, how far he was going to go with it, and
Right.
being, you know, the absolute powerful ring that
Yeah.
it is. But
Yeah, because I mean, the Hobbit, I believe, came out in the 30s.
Yeah, 30s.
Like, I think that was like his beginning right there. I do not think it was until later, after all that he even started the concept of his mythology. Like, I think the Hobbit was.
Dude, that's getting close to 100 years old.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah, it's amazing.
Wow.
You're going to be fighting for those copyright rights here soon. Those might expire, but no, I just think, like you said, they're good, wholesome. J.R.R. Tolkien didn't have to add all that fluff you see in today's books, and I think he really did create that baseline.
I mean, we just kind of touched upon that, so I'll just ask it just so we can discuss it. Do we find Lord of the Rings, one, to be hard to read? And would you say Lord of the Rings is for everyone?
Hard to read some chapters. Great story. I think that it's sometimes like drags on some of the chapters. I think it's for everyone, but I think everyone would have to start with The Hobbit to get invested. I think someone starts with Lord of the Rings, they might struggle.
So we're talking about the books or the story?
Just straight up the books.
So, like, yeah, I do think the books are not for everyone. They are difficult to read. Like, I struggle. I've struggled over the years to read them. Even when I've wanted to try to reread them, I'll get started, and there's a lot. It's a lot. And, like, I struggle reading anyway.
5 pages describing a leaf.
I can read well enough, but, like, actually getting invested in my attention to, like, focus on a book, it's tough. As far as the story, I think the story 100% is for everyone. I think anybody that isn't familiar with it should be. Like, I think it's for everybody. It's people sometimes, like, I mean, even as we're starting this podcast, people are like, oh, you're a little bit of a fantasy nerd and stuff. It's like, I mean, I am, but, like, I think the story that's told in these books and in these movies, like, I think it's a good thing. I think it's something worth, the feelings you get from it and the morals of the story and everything else, I think is. So, like, the story's for everyone. Reading the books, like, I mean, you have to be focused to read those books.
I mean, one thing that kind of makes the books a little more, like, difficult too is, like, everything has, like, multiple names,
Right.
and they refer to things at different times to their different names.
Yeah.
So, like, it makes a little bit
For
of, like,
years, I struggled with that.
it makes a little bit of, like, the comprehension of, like, what they're talking about in the moment. I mean, normally it kind of does come around of, like, oh wait, no, they're talking about this or
Right.
this again or whatever. But there's a little bit of, like, the comprehension of
your sticky
certain
notes.
things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think it goes through. Like, the Silmarillion was hard for me to read. It took me, like, 3 times starting it to actually make it further into the book.
It's like reading an appendix. So it's like,
I mean, even just the beginning, it's so much of, like, the book of Genesis.
yeah,
The creation of Arda is, like,
yeah.
the Bible.
And I mean, it makes sense that it would be, because I mean, all like the post Tolkien's passing is all his sons editing to get these books published and released. Is that, like, they were never released under, like, a lot of his books, I should say, are were never released as a book. They're all edited together, and I think Chris did a fantastic job with a lot of it, but it makes sense that they'd be harder to read, like, because they are his father's, little writings all pieced together to create something. So, like, it makes sense it would be more difficult to read. But I'm like so glad that he took it upon himself to, like, create and release all that, for everyone. Because, like, I mean, again, like, that's a lot of the reason this podcast exists. Is
I
because
wonder what more writings are out there.
I do too.
Is some, and imagine being a kid.
I mean,
though.
what, 2018 was the most recent published work?
Yeah, I think it's the book I just recently bought. I'm not in chapter 1 yet.
What book was that?
The Fall of Numenor.
Oh, yeah.
I
I think it was 2022. I think that's
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
the one that
it's
came
been
out.
recent. So it's like, what other works are still...
Right, the state's still piecing together. Like, that's what I'm wondering.
Well, imagine being like his child and getting to hear the stories from his mouth and his actual true.
He would read the
intention.
stories to his kids
Yeah.
at bedtime.
Yeah, but imagine, like, actually getting to hear, like, his full intention of every character, of every, like, plot point. That had to be pretty, like...
I wonder if that was, like,
amazing.
his way of working out character developments, too.
Yeah,
Like, telling a story, and then a kid would be like, tell me more about,
yeah.
Let me dig through the notes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then he'd be like, well,
That makes you think, like, what if Christopher had a lot of, like, the same kind of, like, imagination that he could have wrote, but he spent his whole life piecing together Tolkien stuff
Yeah.
instead of developing his own?
That's a good
It
damn
turns
son.
out the new releases is actually Christopher's own, and he's like, oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, that's just
Found
what
notes
my
from
dad
father.
said.
Yeah.
Yeah, but going back, I would kind of agree with what Logan was saying. I think the story in and of itself is for everyone. I think everybody can find something to resonate, something in the story that can resonate with themselves. Whether, I don't think the book's for everyone. Not everybody's a fantasy fan.
Yeah.
The
The moral, though, of it, I think is for everyone, for sure.
Oh yeah, it is clean and dry, good versus evil. Like, there's, like, I mean, it's a beautiful story no matter what. Like, we face evil every day, and so, like, to see such a struggle against it and the victory at the end, it's always a good thing. Like, any genre you're watching or reading about, like, it is the greatest story that you can find, and Tolkien just happened to do it in a very elegant way.
Yeah.
I guess I'll throw out one last question out there. Who do we think Sauron hates more, the elves or men?
Elves. I say that because I think he's more fearful of the elves because of their wisdom and knowledge, and I think he knows men are weaker at heart. I think
That makes sense, actually.
Yeah, so
Because I do think even as he's creating the rings for the men, like he knows they're going to be so easily corrupted. So like I think Ryan's right is that like he's more intimidated by elves, and so he probably hates them more because in his mind, men are never going to come against him, never going to defeat him because he can so easily control them.
Yeah.
And I think it probably comes as a surprise that towards the end of it, like men and the hobbits destroying the ring, like are the thing that really defeated him in the end.
Well, I mean, really, if Frodo does not destroy the ring, he does defeat man.
yeah.
I mean,
That's a good point.
Essentially, he would have been right had the ring not been destroyed.
Okay, so now I'm taking this a whole nother direction because something you said. So he's successful. He gets the ring back. Middle Earth has fallen. He builds up his armies. Does he ever return with his army to Valinor?
That'd be cool.
I would imagine he
I
probably
would watch that 100%. That I would say yes. I don't think that you would be able to, once you conquer Middle Earth, to just be content. I think some of Sauron's idealization is he would want more.
Yeah, but he's got to have in the back of his mind, like, the Vala live in Valinor.
But you
Yeah,
probably get cocky after a certain period of time. You know you're going to get drawbacks, but at
It's
some
the
point...
greed of power. That, like,
yeah.
once you kinda get
I
it,
think
there isn't
I
enough.
think one of the most fascinating things about Sauron, and I don't know if we brought this up in a previous episode. We probably mentioned it briefly. Is that like Morgoth wanted to control and destroy, but Sauron actually, in his mind, thinks that his control and his power is for the betterment of the world. And I think that's kind of one of the fascinating, like, intricate things about Sauron is, like, he's not technically in his own mind evil. Like, he
I don't know. Is that factual?
I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure that is accurate. Like, is that, like, Sauron, like, everything he does, like, he wants power and control, but he thinks he can create a better, like, world under his ruling. Like, I mean, like, it like, a government, can do the same thing. Certain governments think, the more control and power they have, it's going to be a better world. And, like, that's exactly kind of Sauron's mindset. Is that, like,
So we need to
under
destroy
me,
Congress.
so, like, under me, I will create a better world is, like, Sauron's plan. It's like, it's not so much like, I mean, it is
But
about...
he did want the destruction of elves and men.
He did want the destruction of elves men, but he also, like, I think he thought they were flawed.
And nobody cares about the dwarves.
Nobody seems to give a shit
I
about
think
the
because they just
dwarves.
hide. Just hide away.
There's not as many of them either, I don't think.
I think there
I mean, by the time of the Third Age, I mean, your remaining dwarves...
By the time of Third Age, I'd say yeah. But I was like, before that, I feel like they were more plentiful than even race of men because you had so many different...
Like, I don't remember how many dwarves kind of still remain in the East.
That's a good question.
You're also a lot more limited by space. You might have more kind of like established dwarf kind of like
Yeah.
mines or whatever.
I mean,
but-
Erebor remained established even into the Third Age, like, well into the Third Age, even the time of the War of the Ring. Yeah. I don't know. I'll have to look into that.
But overall, I think that he hated elves more because he saw them as a bigger threat. In reality.
But at the same time, it was man that cut off his finger and took the ring and destroyed him the first time. And it was Aragorn that he feared.
That's a good
arguably the
point.
most.
Interesting.
But he was also descended, from Numenor, and, like, the Numenorians, like, they're kind of better men.
I wonder if he just like realized that he even had a blind eye to the race of men then where he underestimated them and just couldn't stop
I think
underestimating
he definitely underestimated them. I think it was a mixture of he underestimated them, but he also was not prepared for all this. Like,
Yeah.
he was still building things to his plan, and things just got accelerated before he was ready.
Do you think he enacted trying to take like out the Rohirrim and Rohan and Helm's Deep? You think he enacted that plan too early then? Because that kind of really got things started quickly.
Well, Rohan wasn't a part of his initial plan. That was Saruman's actions.
Yeah, that was Saruman's kind of deal.
But don't you think that they had to communicate on that? He had to know. I imagine if they're working somewhat together that...
Well, I mean, Saruman was more or less working on his own of wanting full power.
That's fair.
Yeah, again, that's one of the movie portrayals that's kind of twisted. Like, Saruman was very much, like, working for his own. Sauron was constantly testing Gondor to see what their defenses were like and if they were ready for an all-out war. And it wasn't until he didn't fully intact Minas Tirith until he was rushed into it because of what happened at Helm's Deep and Aragorn kind of showing himself, you know, at that point. Then he felt, oh, he has to act now or else he loses.
Yeah. Nice.
You kind of mentioned about, like, you know, his fear for Aragorn is more than anybody else. The fear kind of derived because Aragorn showed himself. If it would have been Saruman or Gandalf or whatever showing himself, like, oh, like, I have it, I'm coming for you, I'm pretty sure he would have been just.
I think his fear for
fearful, if not
Aragorn
more.
stems from being bloodline of Elendil and Isildur, and being he lost to them.
Probably have some trauma from that.
Probably. I
Yeah.
mean,
But no, I think that wraps up this one, and we'll see you here back next week and catch you next time.
thanks, guys.
Bye.